Hey, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining. This is Jessica Corbett with External Affairs at Fulton County. It's been a long and very interesting election day, and I just appreciate everyone being patient with us as we've had to reschedule tonight's briefing and make some adjustments. So Mr. Barron is with us. We're going to have him make a few statements to open up, and then we're going to take some questions after that. The polls are closing as we speak, so it's a very busy time for Mr. Barron. And we're going to go ahead and I'm glad you guys were enjoying the spooky music. I'm not sure what was playing, but I hope it wasn't too creepy. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we will hear from Mr. Barron now. And then I will come back on and we'll take some questions. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, everybody. We were waiting for, there was a very loud noise going through the atrium here. The polls are closing now. They closed at 9. As you know, we did get a court order to keep all the polls open throughout Fulton County until 9 o'clock tonight. And after 7 o'clock, because of a state law, everyone that voted from between 7 and 9 in the extended hours had to vote a provisional ballot. That is complete. Anybody in line at 9 o'clock will of course be allowed to vote. We had an eventful day. I think one of the things that we're going to be able to do is do a good postmortem on this election and look to see everywhere that we can make improvements. There will be a lot of room for improvement when it comes to August and also November. We're going to bring in a consultant. The board and I have been talking about that for a couple of weeks since early on during early voting. And I think that's going to be the best thing to do, especially when it comes to ballot by mail. Right now, I guess the best thing to do, since you got the statement that we released earlier, is I'm just going to take a few questions until I need to go over to Georgia World Congress Center and then to the Election Preparation Center.
Thank you, Mr. Barron, and thank you everyone again for your flexibility. If you just want to type in the comments, I will call on people in order and let Rick take a few questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. If there's someone who I think you all can unmute yourselves. I don't see any questions in the chat. One thing I'd like to clarify, because I've had a few questions about it, is ask Rick to clarify which ballots are being counted at which location. I think many of you have visited us at the Georgia World Congress Center where we are counting absentee ballots. That is not where everything is being counted. So I'm just going to ask him while folks are, if you have any questions to ask Rick to just comment on that.
Yes, at the Georgia World Congress Center, we are counting all of the absentee ballots that we received. Through Sunday, we had received over 85,000. And then I believe today we received mail on Sunday, 2 different times from the Postal Service. So yesterday we didn't get any mail. And then today we received another more than almost 7,500. We will get ballots from the drop boxes tonight. Those were open until 9 o'clock once the poll hours were extended. And at the Election Preparation Center, all of the early votes will be tabulated. The votes actually for the absentee ballots by mail will be tabulated at the Election Preparation Center on English Street. However, they are all scanned and processed over at Georgia World Congress Center. That is a very big operation over there. In case if any of you have been over there, you'll see that there are more than 220 people at work over there to processing the over 90,000 absentee ballots that we received. Just to give you an idea of the difference between this primary this year, which is the general primary. We've received over 92,000 absentee ballots by mail. In the 2016 general primary, we only received 947 ballots. Okay, I can take questions.
All right, thank you, Rick. We have a question from Ben Brash at the AJC, and Ben, you can unmute yourself, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it. He said, "What exactly went wrong today, aside from backlog and new equipment? What specific things happened, and if there were multiples, please elaborate."
I think there were several things today that we can learn from. We had a number of poll workers that didn't show up in many precincts, and that is something that we feared that would happen. We had even 2 poll managers in the last couple of days that tested positive for COVID, so they couldn't work. I think one of the big challenges for us was that we had 45 polling place changes. That's something usually you won't see unless you're in a 2-year cycle. You might see that many polling place changes over that time period. The challenges of that is that we had to get, a lot of them happened. 44 of the 45 were directly due to COVID. We had to get out ahead of household mailing to announce those changes. We had to try to get those publicized out there in any way that we could, from next door through elected officials. And we had to make sure that voters knew where the new polling places, where their new polling places were. Because if you vote you vote anywhere other than your assigned precinct on election day, you have to vote a provisional ballot. That is one thing that happened at precincts around the county today, because many people were confused by all of the different polling place changes. We don't like to change polling places, but in the middle of this pandemic, we were faced with one polling place after another dropping out, and we dropped from 198 polling places down to 164. We were able to combine a number, and so that's why the 45 that changed reduced our polling location numbers down to 34. We also lost a lot of poll workers. We had a lot of new poll workers in the field today. One of the other things that happened was that this was brand new equipment. The last time the poll workers were trained for the March presidential preference primary between January and March. Their in-person training was in those months. Since then, we haven't been able to do in-person training. That we did some refreshers in the last few days, but people did not want to attend in-person training at the height of the concern over the pandemic in March, April, and into May. We would have lost more poll workers had we done in-person training because people weren't comfortable with it. That was another challenge that we had. So we had to do video training, we had to do webinars, and then we did demos during supply pickup. And we also did, for those poll workers that were interested in coming in person, we did do trainings that way. So what that did by having all of those trainings occur is through video, is you don't get your hands on the equipment. So a lot of poll workers were confused this morning in many different precincts about several different things. Our call center was overloaded with calls from poll workers that had issues.
How many precincts and all had issues? I don't mean to interrupt. How many
that
precincts
ranged
had issues?
all the way across the spectrum. I think some of the other things, we did have equipment issues. We had scanners that would power down, jammed. We also had, in some cases, polling or ballot marking devices plugged into the one circuit. Maybe there were too many plugged into one circuit, and so that would cause some of them to flicker. We were having to get technicians out there. We had more than 90 technicians hired for this election that were either roving around or assigned to specific precincts. And those are some of the issues that we saw. It was mostly equipment issues, many caused by different training challenges that we had.
Thank you, Rick, for that. Ben, hopefully we answered your questions. Next question we have is from WABE, A Closer Look, wants to know, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says it's Fulton County's fault. Is it? I'm not sure what that means. Follow-up question from WABE, Secretary of State says he's investigating Fulton County. Have we heard from him directly, and will, Rick wants to know, will you cooperate with an investigation?
We haven't heard from the Secretary of State directly, no. Whenever a county is whenever an investigation of a county opens up, whenever a voter initiates a complaint with the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office has a team of investigators. They investigate every complaint that comes in. So whenever the first complaint comes in, an investigation is opened. It is terminology that is used by the Secretary of State's office. Whether it is, look, all I'm doing is looking forward to finishing the job of this election and looking forward to seeing what we can do better going forward. Whatever Secretary Raffensperger's opinion is, it's his opinion alone, and he can say whatever he wants. I disagree with him. I think he's the head election official in the state, and he can't wash his hands of all the responsibility for this election. So that's pretty much where I'll leave that question.
Thank you, Rick. Next question from Ben again. He wants to know how this today's events, I guess, fit into the history of Fulton County's election hiccups, or is this something different?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I mean, obviously this election posed some problems for us that no other election, I think 2012, we haven't seen anything like this since 2012 in terms of issues on election day. And, you know, it's not uncommon to have a few precincts here and there have issues, but this hit us in many different fronts, from absentee by mail to election day. During early voting, we had to reduce the number of early voting sites that we had. We had processed more than 143,000 absentee ballot applications. That is four times or 4.5 times the amount of a normal presidential election. It stretched us thin as far as staffing goes. We got behind, of course, in April with the head of the absentee ballot coming down with COVID, and then one of his chief staff members dying from COVID. So we got behind in April. We had 6 of the first 9 days where we were processing that when we got behind, and that set us off on the wrong foot. It took us a long time to catch up, but we did. And you know, what I want to do is thank all the voters that did participate in this election. We are going to look exactly at everything that happened in this election and go forward. And we will make sure that in November, we serve the voters of this county with distinction.
Thank you, Rick. Next question is, what would you say to voters who may be worried about November?
Well, I think what we're going to have to do for November is, regardless of where we are in terms of the pandemic, we are going to have to open all of our early voting sites. If we need to open 24 early voting sites and have another 15 outreach sites, we're just going to have to do that to take the pressure off of election day and also take the pressure off of the absentee by mail process. The absentee by mail process, it was an election in and of itself. You know, you have states out there in the West that do ballot by mail professionally. that is what they do. Their elections are almost exclusively by mail. They have no polling sites. They have no early voting. They do it by mail. What we were asked to do was do absentee by mail. We became an absentee by mail state. We still had to do our full complement of election day infrastructure. We did our early voting infrastructure, and it stretched us. We tried to face those challenges, and I think, you know, when you have the offices that are closed, you're managing people teleworking from homes all over the county. We ran into a lot of challenges this time, so I think we are going to learn from this and move forward.
Thank you, Rick. I think we're going to take like one or two more questions. We have one here from Faith says, is it true that Georgia's absentee ballots were processed and mailed by Runbeck from Arizona as contracted by the Secretary of State on April 25th, and the counties were only responsible for processing the applications and not mailing them until last week?
Yeah, the Secretary of State's office, what the process was that the Secretary of State's office mailed out the absentee ballot applications to voters originally. Now, I don't know to which counties, the voters in each county received their applications at different times. I don't know where Fulton was with regard to that order and when our voters received those applications in comparison to others, but I know that that sometime around April 6th, April 5th, April 6th, a lot of Fulton voters started receiving their absentee ballot applications in the mail. The voters would then send them by email to us or send them through mail. The vast majority of them came via mail. Then once we processed them, Runbeck out of Arizona would mail those. They started mailing them on April 21st. And the last processing day for the counties was May 28th. So and then whatever was processed on May 28th, Runbeck would then mail, and I think they got the last of those out on either 6/1 or 6/2. The counties then took over mailing from the applications they started receiving on May 29th and then mailed out the final week. And so we were responsible for the last week to mail out those ballots.
Okay, well, that is the last question we've received at this time. As you can imagine, this is a very busy night for Mr. Barron, so we want to get him back to work. Last question, closer look says, what should Governor Kemp do at this point? I don't know if that's something Mr. Barron wants to comment on, but we'll let him take that.
Well, I think I think really what should happen at this point is, after an election such as this, I think it is up to the Secretary of State's office to do some sort of postmortem with the counties and take all of the counties and get feedback on what went right and what went wrong. If the Secretary of State can't take on the leadership of that, then I will get together with all of the metro counties and we will take that on ourselves, because we need to have, the counties need to have a plan. All of us need to get together and compare notes of what we did well and what we didn't do well. We need to go through that together as a group and figure out how we go forward to do the August runoff and the November general election, which is a very important election in this country's history. And we need to make sure that we nail that election right. So I think one of the first things I'll do tomorrow is start getting in touch with my fellow elections director to get a meeting together so that all of us can get together and discuss that, because we need to have some sort of leadership from the counties so that we can drive this process forward to make sure that November is a success, because the counties are the ones that have to do all the work on the front lines to make this election successful. And we need to make sure that we all have the resources to go forward, and we need to make sure that we get the support from the Secretary of State's office. And we need the Secretary of State's office to be involved in that process and show some leadership and not point the fingers at the counties and view us as partners in this process.
Thank you, Rick. We have one more question here. It says, should Fulton County redo today's elections?
I think, as you've seen across the country, once the election is done, I don't know how many people voted today. What I would like to do is thank all the voters that voted, for coming out, for waiting in line, for braving the elements, for making sure that they voted, for turning in their absentee ballots, for voting early, and showing the dedication to vote in this election. We had a 13.7% turnout for the general primary in 2016. And I think for this year's election, we're going to probably at least double that, which will end up exceeding 2018's general primary as well. So I think what we need to do is look at how we can do better going forward.
Thank you very much. Everyone, I think we're going to wrap this up so Mr. Barron can get back to work and proceed processing the ballots now that the polls are closed. I want to thank all of you. This recording will be on our YouTube channel. And again, we are here at our office to help answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Barron. Thank you, poll workers. And of course, thank you, voters, for exercising your voice in these really unusual times in our community. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you again.